Hello everyone, my name is Szabi. I am currently a research master student at Maastricht University, specialized in cognitive neuroscience. And in my talk, I would like to explore the potential neurological underpinnings of psychedelic drugs' impact on social cognition. As an introduction, I would like to start with two trip reports. The first of which goes, our consciousnesses, our thoughts, our feelings merged into one. This might be hard to visualize if you haven't experienced it, but it gives you the effect that you literally are the other person, that they may be a projection of your own mind. I had melded into this person, and he was effectively a projection of my own mind. And the second one goes, I have pet mice which I communicate with in ketamine trips. I can at times switch into mouse point of view, feel the mouse's mind, and urge my little friend to do this or to do that and watch it happen. There is a very strong feeling of love with this. The mouse is my friend, I protect her, love her, and vice versa. Somehow, ketamine increases our bond. As a cognitive neuroscientist, I am fascinated by these exotic human experiences, and I immediately see a huge puzzle. How are these experiences possible in the first place? And what is going on in our mind when we feel them? So in my talk, I'm attempting to answer this somehow that is mentioned in the last sentence. So the outline of my talk, I already talked about the effect of psychedelics on social cognition from a qualitative standpoint, so that you can feel and see what we are talking about. Next, I am going to explore the neural processes of social cognition as determined by social cognitive neuroscience at the moment. And I am going to focus on neurosynchrony and mirroring. And then I will give you what is the current scientific understanding of psychedelics' effect on social cognition, but now from a quantitative perspective. And finally, I will give you my attempt at solving this puzzle. So let's get back to the trip reports for a moment, because when one of these people were asked what were the circumstances when they started to have this experience, they said, we were completely absorbed in something else, relaxed, distracted, and in sync. And you might also be familiar with phrases like, we are on the same wavelength, and you resonate with me. And at first, I thought that these were just some romantic notions that would capture kind of the feeling of understanding between two people. And it doesn't go much deeper than these funky images on the internet where two brains are connected by some waves. But in actuality, there are currently some hyperscanning experiments, which is opposed to simple scanning, I guess, measures the brain activity from two or more people simultaneously while they are interacting with each other. So you can imagine that this is very important to assess what is happening in the brain in a naturalistic social interaction. And in these hyperscanning experiments, researchers found that actually some parts of our brains are synchronized with each other when we are interacting with each other. So how do we measure this synchrony? The first method we can use is electroencephalography, or EEG. As you might know, the brain is comprised of neurons, and these are cells that communicate with each other with electrical signals. And they usually do this in a rhythmic fashion, so they produce some electrical oscillations. And what is amazing, in my opinion, is we can just slap a few electrodes on your scalp and we can record these brain oscillations. And good point with this method is that these electrical signals are very quick to arise, so we can really precisely pinpoint when these processes happen. But unfortunately, we cannot really say where exactly in the brain they arise from. So if we plot two of these signals, in our case, they would look something like this. They're oscillations, waves, and we can plot the activity from person A and person B and try to align them. And in our case, we can see that in this first bit, they are not aligned very well, but in this second phase, they are quite synchronized. So this is what we call the synchronization of two brains. And we can further quantify this by taking the phase of the oscillations, which simply means where is the lowest point and the highest point in the oscillation. And we can make these kinds of plots. And this makes the picture even clearer, because in this gray bit, we can see that the phases do not align very well, but later in this red area, they seem to be quite synchronized. So a second possible method we can use is functional magnetic resonance imaging, or fMRI. And this is going to capture a blood oxygen level dependent signal, which is unfortunately very slow to arise. So we cannot really say when things happen in the brain, but fortunately we can say with high precision where from the brain these signals are coming from. And another limitation in our case is that you are tucked into this huge machine where you can barely move or talk. And so it is very hard to have a natural interaction with other people while you are being scanned. But still, we can have some people speaking and some people listening to that speech. And we can try to align the brain scans of two people who are listening to the same story, or one people who is speaking and one who is listening to that story. And in both cases, we can see that some of the brain areas, they activate at the same time. So synchrony, we know how to measure it. Now, what does it mean, if it means anything? And I want to emphasize that not all synchronies are created equal, because in some cases, we can just hear or see or experience the same stimuli arising at the same time. And obviously, in this case, our brain activities will be very, very similar to each other. And in this case, this synchrony that we see is not indicative of any kind of social interaction going on between people. But in other cases, there is a leader-follower or sequential interaction possible. And this talk is a very good example of this, because I unfortunately cannot see or hear you, so I cannot really synchronize to you at this moment. But if you are listening, you might be able to synchronize to me. And in this case, researchers found that this synchrony is correlated with our understanding of each other. For example, if we just listen to somebody speaking, we get in synchrony, and our feelings toward each other. This includes emotional empathy that I will speak more later about. And there is also dynamic interactions possible between either two people or even a whole group of people, where they are synchronized together. And this interaction opens up a new dimension. And researchers found that cooperation or movement coordination is also correlated with neural synchrony. So, for example, if you are dancing with a partner, or if you are playing in a group or a band, then you might want to be really synchronized to the other people around you, so that you play the right tone at the right time, or that you don't step on the other people's feet. So we saw that these synchronies are indicative of some kind of social interactions, but still remains a question: how is this possible? How are our brains synchronizing to each other? And a potential answer, although this hasn't been experimentally tested yet, is mirroring. So a little background. we know that neurons in the motor cortex, we call them motor neurons, they usually are engaged when we are doing an action. So if you can imagine a monkey with an electrode placed in their brain that captures a single neuron's activity, that this monkey is when eating a banana, their motor neurons will start firing, and this will cause the movements of the arm and the lips, and ultimately the monkey can eat their banana. So this is nothing out of the ordinary. Well, now let's see what happens when the monkey only observes an action. Well, the other monkey eating the banana will show some motor activity, obviously. But what is really curious is the monkey that is simply observing the other monkey eating the banana will also show some motor neuron activation. And this was quite puzzling at first, but this prompted researchers to come up with a new class of neurons called mirror neurons. And these are classified as activated both during execution and observation of actions. So mirroring, what does this mean? What can we use these mirror neurons for? And I think of these mirroring as a sort of automated mental mimicry. So we are automatically kind of mimicking the actions of others that we see around us. And this has been implicated in social learning. Of course, if we can play out a movement in our mind, we can learn it better. Also emotional contagion. So you might imagine again that you are a monkey in the wild and you cannot see a predator behind you, but you can see one of your monkey mates being very, very frightened. And in this case, you might also want to be frightened a little bit and potentially run away, even you don't see the actual predator. And it also has been implicated, although this is very, very debated at the moment, in our understanding of each other. So there is some evidence to point towards this because socially relevant actions tend to be mirrored more. And there are also some evidence pointing to the fact that these mirror neurons play a role in our understanding of language. Now, another important point to emphasize is we cannot directly measure or see mirror neurons in humans because we cannot put electrodes in our brains because that's quite invasive. And EEG and fMRI both captures just a large amount of neurons and not individual neurons. So what we can do is measure them indirectly. So this is an EEG measurement of the motor cortex when a person is doing an action. And you can see this frequency band between about 8 and 15 hertz is considered to be an inhibitory frequency. And this inhibitory frequency is constantly applied to the motor cortex so that you are not doing any movements unnecessarily. But you can see that this inhibitory frequency is partially lifted when we are executing an action. So it's blue, so this is a negative tendency. And what is interesting, we can see a very similar thing when we are only imagining moving our hands, fingers, etc. Although to a lesser extent and also lesser in duration. And now we come to observation of other actions. We see a very similar lifting of inhibition in the motor cortex, although even to a lesser extent than imagination and also lesser in duration. So I talked about basically what is the current standing in social neuroscience, and now I want to focus on the quantitative research on social cognition under the effects of psychedelics. So we can see an increased feeling of connectedness or unity with oneself also with other people around us, and also with the environment, whether natural or potentially unnatural. And we can measure these using scales such as the Watts connectedness scale. There is also some evidence pointing to a benefit to pro-social behavior, but keep in mind that these studies are usually observational, so we cannot really pull any causal relationships between psychedelics and pro-social behavior. And there is also an effect on empathy, but to discuss that, I first want to emphasize two kinds of empathies that are relevant to our discussion. So one side of the coin is cognitive empathy, and this is our ability to know the other people's feelings. So for example, if I see somebody smiling, I might assess this as them being very happy about something. And the other side of the coin is emotional empathy, and this is our ability to actually feel the other people's feelings, even though if we cannot really put it into words or understand it. And this, as you might imagine, is very important for pro-social behavior, because if somebody's suffering is also my suffering, then I will tend to cause this suffering less. And if somebody's happiness is also my happiness, then I will aim to increase their happiness in any way. So what does psychedelics do to this? Interestingly, it does not seem to affect cognitive empathy at all. In some cases, it might even decrease it a little bit. But in general, we do not see any kind of effect in any direction. But when we see emotional empathy, we see an increase in emotional empathy scores. So this means that under psychedelics, people tend to feel the emotions of others a little bit more, whether they are positive or negative. So just to recap all the pieces of the puzzle so far, psychedelics can lead to an increased emotional empathy, also a feeling of connectedness, and potentially a complete dissolution of the boundaries between the self and the other. Also, we saw that when two or more people interact, their brain activity can synchronize, and this is indicative of some social interactions. And we also saw that some mirror neurons in the motor cortex also activate when we observe an action and not just when we are executing them. And this is very similar to mental imagery, but it activates the motor cortex to a lesser extent. And now I would like to give you my hypothesis of solving this puzzle. So this is my mirror neuron hypothesis of psychedelics. First, we start off with psychedelics, and this may include classical serotonergic psychedelics like psilocybin and LSD, but also non-classical psychedelics such as MDMA and even maybe ketamine based on the trip report with mice. So taking these psychedelics might lead to an inhibition of control networks, such as the default mode network, which you might have heard about already, based on previous research. And this could lead to a disinhibition of other brain networks, which might include the mirror neuron system as well. This in turn can increase the interpersonal neural synchrony between the two people. And also, when we increase the activity of these mirror neurons, first we can see an increase in emotional empathy through an increase in emotional mimicry, essentially. And then if we increase the activity a little more, we can feel more connected to other people. And if we put these neurons to overdrive, then we might have some trouble differentiating between seeing another person doing an action and ourselves actually imagining that same action. And in this case, this might cause a dissolution of boundaries and the merging of self and other. Now, I would like to finish by saying that this puzzle is far from complete. For example, we currently don't know whether neurosynchrony is just an epiphenomenon of two brains trying to predict each other, or whether it's an actual mechanism. And in this case, we could think of the two brains as one functional unit, where this neurosynchrony actually causes something, some feelings maybe. We also do not know currently whether psychedelics really engage mirror neurons and whether they increase interpersonal neurosynchrony. So all the labs currently running a hyperscanning experiment with psychedelics, including Imperial College and the group at Maastricht University, to answer these questions. Also, something that I did not touch on because I'm a cognitive neuroscientist is the role of brain receptors and also of hormones such as oxytocin in this whole story. There's also some food for thought for all the neurobiologists out there. And with that, I would like to thank you for your attention. And I would like to thank all these people on the slide that made this presentation way better. And these are my references. Feel free to take a screenshot if you would like, or write me an email to ask about more questions. Thank you.